Yeah, ready? Okay. Good evening. So we're doing today's Amud is Daf Yutes Amud Aleph, and we're holding, I think, 6 lines from the top of the page. Amr Sheshes. We're still talking about the same topic. The topic is with regards to Bikurim, right? In the Mishnah we had Tanakam, and the Mishnah, well, Tanakam, in the Mishnah we had Oichel Bikurim Shalei Kara Alein. That Tan of the Mishnah that Yudzayin Amud Aleph said that someone who eats Bikurim, in other words, the Kohen who eats Bikurim, right? The Kohen's allowed to eat Bikurim, but the Kohen can only eat Bikurim in Yerushalayim, obviously, but also after. The only way you should eat the Bikurim after all the different avodas have happened on the Bikurim. So the Mishnah says that the Kohen eats the Bikurim actually Koralem before Kriya takes place. Before the Yit is Koire, he reads a whole bunch of Psukim, thanking the Eibishter for the fruits that he has. And the Bikurim is an expression of this appreciation that he has, and the Kriya is an expression of this appreciation that he has for his fruits, and this is what the whole mitzvah of Bikurim is. So if the Kohen eats the Bikurim before the Kriya has taken place, and he gets Malchus, right? And how we know that is a discussion in the Gemara Daf Yudzayin Amud Aleph, and then ultimately again on Daf Yudches Amud Aleph. The maskana is that it's actually learned from the Kra Yisera. In other words, the fact that it says is extra, because it already says a positive mitzvah to eat all the different things, including Bikurim in the Chayma in Yerushalayim. So that second pasuk which says Lo Yisuch Alechol, it could have just said Lo Yisuch Alechol is an extra pasuk. So we learn from the Lo Yisuch Alechol that Bikurim actually Koralem. In other words, even though the pasuk is telling you not to eat it outside of the Chayma, but that can't be because it could have already told me that. It could have already told me that by just saying Lo Yisuch Alechol. The fact that it's Mefared Bikurim and all the other things must be telling me an extra then. So ultimately, Maskana Daf Yudches Amud Aleph is that Lo Yisuch Alechol b'Sharecha, right? Trumas Yad Chayil Bikurim refers to not eating Bikurim outside of the Chayim, which we already know from Lo Yisuch Alechol. But the fact that it says Bikurim again is to tell me that the Kohen who eats it before Kriya is loika, is allowed. Okay, that's the Tana of our Mishnah, and that's the shit of Reb Shimon in the Bryce and Daf Yudzayin Amud Aleph, and that's the shit of Rabbi Kiva, the way Rabbi Yochanan says at the beginning. But by Emes, the Rabbanan hold that Hanocha Makavis Kriya is not Mak. Okay, so then that's what we saw a little bit in the previous Gemara and Daf Yudches Amud Beis, the discussion between whether Bikurim Hanocha Makavis or Kriya Makavis, and we even had a day that neither is Ma'akav, it just has to be Mishayuru Pnei Abayis, then the Kohanim already allowed to eat it. So you have a few different days as to what's the story with Bikurim. But now we go back to this topic, and we say the Amr of Sheshes learns, Rav Sheshes is an Amoyer, but he passes like the Rabbanon, he says Bikurim Hanocha Makavis man, Kriya Ein Makavis man. The Bikurim Hanocha is Ma'akav, the Kriya is not Ma'akav. And the Gemara asks command, which will pass a little bit difficult command. What's more than mean command? You already said that Rabbanon say Hanocha is Ma'akav and Kriya Kriya is not Ma'akav. So the Chorah Pshat is, if I'm not mistaken, I saw this. In other words, who beferish taiches? In other words, which brisa spells it out clearly. Let's see inside. Either way, we have to. This question has to be addressed. In other words, the Chorah, the Rabbanon said Kriya is Ma'akav. Sorry, Hanocha is Ma'akav and Kriya is not Ma'akav. So what's up is command. Okay. Hakuponim, that's the Gemara's question, command. The Gemara answers, Ki Hai Tana goes like the following Tana. The Tana we learned in the Brisa. Rabbi Yosi said there's 3 things. Rabbi Yosi said 3 things in the name of Shleish Zakanim. The Maisa, this the part of the Brisa that we're going to say over here, is only one of those things, which is in the name of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel said the following din. Yochel Yalo Adam Maisa Sheni Bizman Azebu Yerushalayim V'Yechlenu. Discussion over here in the following brisa is, even though nowadays we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, but nevertheless, is there still perhaps Kedushas Yerushalayim? Is there still perhaps Kedushas Habayis for certain dinim? So Yochel, a person might have a minute. The Yalo the Ma'aser Sheni is man as Yerushalayim V'Yechlenu. He's still got a chiyuv to mafresh Ma'aser Sheni. That's for sure. The question is, can you actually take the Ma'aser Sheni into Yerushalayim and eat it, just like in the Zman Habayis, where you would take the Ma'aser Sheni and you'd eat it in Yerushalayim, and the Zor would be able to eat it in Yerushalayim. So I might have thought that Yalo the Ma'aser Sheni is man as Yerushalayim V'Yechlenu. Why might I have thought so? Because I might have thought that the Kedushas of Yerushalayim stays. So he says, no, V'dinhu. That we learn out of V'dinhu. V'dinhu over here doesn't mean a Kal V'chomer, but it means a Binyan Av. Binyan Av means that we find somewhere else such a din. And although it only says a benegay to something else, if there's no reason why not to apply it to the din that we're talking about over here, that's called a binyan av. So the din, we can do a binyan av. In other words, we learn from bechor. Bechor ton havas makan. Bechor is needs to be brought up to Yerushalayim. Or ma'aseh sheni ton havas makan. Ma'aseh sheni also needs to be brought up to Yerushalayim. Ma bechor ein ela b'fnei abayis is just like bechor we know can only be done in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. That's the binyan av. The Gemara is later going to discuss why is it so kosher to that by bechor it's not shaykh nowadays. Maybe bechor can also be brought up and be eaten in Yerushalayim. We'll get into the details later. But our koponim at this stage of the brides takes some pshit the pashtos that bechor can only be done b'fnei abayis, and there's no reason to be mechaleh between bechor and ma'aseh sheni. And if bechor is ein ela b'fnei abayis, so ma'aseh sheni also it's a binyan av. We apply whatever the din is by bechor to ma'aseh sheni. There's no reason to be mechaleh. The Gemara. The Brisa challenges this binyan av by saying that binyan av only works when there's no reason to be mechaleh. But if you can find the chumrah in the thing that you're learning from, so then you don't learn the binyan av, and that's the Gemara's kasha. And it's not just stama pircha; it's even stronger than a regular pircha. A regular pircha to binyan av, and what you're saying is that the thing that you're learning from, the binyan av, so to speak, the father, the thing that you're learning from has some sort of chumrah, which perhaps might be the reason why it has the other chumrah, but maybe not. But akopanim we can't learn. Here it's even stronger than that. It's a direct pircha, meaning to say, it's not just the bechor as a chumrah, but the reason why bechor. Right, this stage of the brayso. The reason why the bechor is taka you can't bring up nowadays is because you don't have a mizbeach. You can't do the whole bechor. Ma'aseh sheni is a glatta din that you have to bring it up to Yerushalayim. A simple din. You have Yerushalayim. You have bechor. You have kedushas Yerushalayim. For all we know, but don't learn from bechor. Bechor. The reason why you don't have bechor nowadays is because you don't have the mizbeach. And part of the bechor isn't just to eat in Yerushalayim. It's to sprinkle the blood and offer up the imurin on the mizbeach, and that you don't know. So obviously bechor can't be done nowadays. There's no. You can't learn from bechor to ma'aseh sheni. So the Gemara says, true, you can't learn from bechor, but bikurim yoichichu. But bikurim should prove, meaning to say, bikurim it doesn't need matan dam and beimur negamis. Bikurim doesn't. You don't offer up. It's not a carbon. You don't sprinkle the blood. You don't burn up the bikurim on the mizbeach. And nevertheless, bikurim you can't do nowadays. Also, why do we take on the pshitas that bikurim can't be done nowadays? But the Gemara assumes, the Bryce assumes that bikurim for sure can't be done nowadays, and therefore bikurim yechichu that even though it doesn't need matan dam v'imur legam mizbeach is so that's the Gemara. No, there's no right from bikurim because mal bikurim shekain tunim hanach. Bikurim at the end of the day does need something. It does have some connection to the mizbech. It's not a carbon, but it needs v'hinachta lifnei Hashem lekach. It needs a hanacha before the mizbech. You don't have the mizbech. You can't do hanacha. So it's obvious why bikurim doesn't apply nowadays. But you can't apply whatever you learn by bikurim and bechor to ma'aseh sheni, because both the bechor and bikurim have some sort of connection to the mizbech. Bechor is matan dam ve'imur, and bikurim doesn't need matan dam ve'imur, but bikurim is ton hanacha. So finally, the Brisa says that we don't learn from a binyan av, and this you always have to remember. There's a difference in a binyan av, which is a svara, and a hakash. A hakash is when two things are said next to each other in the pasuk. So then, even if one has a chumrah that the other doesn't have, it doesn't make a difference. We compare one to the other. It says in one pasuk, it says you should eat before Hashem, which means in Yerushalayim. Each one according to its din, but okay, let's just say it's in Yerushalayim, and it continues to say Ma'aseh, the Gan, which refers to Ma'aseh Sheni, and a whole list of things, including B'choros, B'karcha B'tzeinach. So we say that so we compare one to the other, just like B'chor can only be done Bisman Abayis, so too Ma'aseh Sheni can also only be done Bisman Abayis. It's no longer a binyan av that we're applying this svara, what it says by one to the other, and there's no reason to be mechalek, because there is a reason to be mechalek, like we said earlier. The B'chor is Tan Matan Dam V'imur Negam Mizbech, even Bikurim is Tan Hanocha. But the fact that the pasuk makes in the same pasuk it says bechor and ma'aseh sheni teaches me that whatever applies to bechor applies to ma'aseh sheni. Makish ma'aseh bechor ma bechor ein elo b'fnei abayis af ma'aseh ein elo b'fnei abayis. Period. End of the brisa. That's what you have to remember. Okay. At this point is the end of the brisa, and the brisa is discussing a different topic, whether you can bring up ma'aseh sheni nowadays and eat in Yerushalayim. And the answer is no from a hakash. The Gemara is just going back to original topic, which was Rav Shesha said that Bikurim Anocha Ma'akav and Kriya is not Ma'akav. So the Gemara is pointing out that this Braisa is a sad, is a raya to Rav Shesha's. Why? Because when we slugged up the Binyanav from Bikurim, we said Ma'ale Bikurim Shekain Tunim Anocha. The Bikurim needs Anocha. The Emes, in truth, if Kriya was Ma'akav, right, then Bikurim also needs Kriya. Bikurim also needs Kriya, another Churma, right? So the Gemara should have said that. Right? He said if it's true that Bikurim Kriya is Ma'akav, Lifrich, the Gemara's Kasha should have been not just that Bikurim needs Hanacha, but Ma'ale Bikurim Shekain Tunim Kriya. The Bikurim needs Kriya v'Hanacha. Why didn't the Braisa formulate the language in which to ask this Kasha in a more accurate way? The Bikurim doesn't just need Hanacha. Bikurim also needs Kriya v'Hanacha. Is a raya that the Tan of the Braisa understood that Kriya is not Ma'akav. The Kriya is not Ma'akav, and therefore it only said Hanacha. Right? So that is, at this stage, the Gemara asked Kiman, and the Gemara answered Ki Hai Tan of the Tanya. Now Rav Ashi asked the Kasha. Rav Ashi asked the Kasha on this raya that you're bringing from the Braisa, from the fact that the Braisa doesn't say Shekain Tunim Kriya is a raya, the Kriya is not Ma'akav. Nehidi Kuvaleka, true that the Kuvaleka, that it's not Ma'akav, the Kriya is not Ma'akav, mitzvah mi leka. The lema mitzvah lifrech. At the end of the day, still has a chumrah that it needs kriya. It's just that the kriya is not ma'akav. The lema mitzvah lifrech. In other words, your kasha is a kasha either way. Your kasha on the Braisa is a kasha even if kriya is not ma'akav. It should have said ma'ale bikurim shekain tunim kriya nacha. Elamai. There must be a different reason why we didn't say kriya. And if that's the case, there's no raya that kriya is ma'akav. Yeah. Rav Ashi need the kuva like a mitzvah milaka. The lema mitzvah lifrech. The Gemara should have asked the kasha that it's a mitzvah and asked the kasha that way. And from the fact that the Gemara, the Braisa doesn't say Kriya, must be there's another reason why it doesn't include Kriya. Not because it's not Ma'akav, because if it was just the mere fact that it's not Ma'akav, it still should have asked the Kasha. Ella, Rav Ashi, rather, Rav Ashi says that given that it could be Kuriya Ageh, since there's a case of Bikuri Ageh, Goy Sabach base, right? And by MS, there's other types of Bikurim as well, which Kriya doesn't apply. That the boy that in the Kriya he has to say the words the thanking for the land which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave over to his father, swore to give over to the Avos, and the Ger can't say it because it's not his father's. So then therefore, so it wasn't clear. In other words, Bikurim doesn't always need Kriya, even Lechatchila. Sometimes it doesn't need Kriya at all. There's other cases, by the way, like we said earlier, maybe Sukkos Ve'elach or Admas Nachri, different cases where there's no, I say that because the Ma'aseh Halacha Bikuri Ager does need, the Mishnah says that it's Ein Kaira, but the Halacha is like, I think, right, so it says that Ager is maybe V'kaira. But either way, even if that's true, there's cases, in other words. It can be Kriya and other cases where you need where there's no Kriya for whatever reason. So therefore, like Psikale, and therefore it says Tonim Hanacha because that's every Bikurim needs Hanacha, Masha'en King Kriya, not necessarily. But therefore, there's no Raya. It could be Be'emes that Kriya is Ma'akav. In other words, when there's a Kriya of Kriya is Ma'akav. And the reason why it doesn't say Kriya is because there isn't always Kriya. Okay. I mean, there's no Raya. So that's ultimately this stage of the Gemara. I don't think it's just at this stage of the Gemara, it's the Maskana of the Gemara. There's taka no raya that this Tanya Rabbi Yossi Oima with the whole, right, with Rabbi Shmuel's whole din and Kavachomer and Pericha from the Kavachomer, the Bikurim Kriya Ein Ma'akav as a Baim. The Braisa could be the Kriya is Yama'akav, and the reason why the Braisa didn't use that as part of its Pericha on Bikurim and say Shekain Tunim Kriya V'Anoch is because there isn't always a need for Kriya. When there is a need for Kriya, it's taka Ma'akav, but there isn't always a need for Kriya because there's Bikuri Ager and other cases where there's no Kriya of Kriya in the first place. So therefore, just came to the man. Okay. Now going back to the Braisa now, the Gemara asks the Kasha that the Braisa seemingly didn't finish off talking. In other words, normally when we learn a binyan from one place and we say that another thing should be Moichiach, and we say no, it can't be Moichiach because that has a Chumrah. So the Gemara, the Braisa or Gemara's next stage will be learn it from a combination of the two. Taka, you can't learn Ma'aseh Sheni from a binyan av from Bechor alone, because Bechor is Tan, Mat, and Dami, Bechor is a Chumrah that you need to, it's a carbon, you need to offer it up on the Mizbeach and do Zrika and burn the parts of it on the Mizbeach. And you can't learn from Bikurim because Bikurim needs Hanacha, but learn it from both combined, right? Learn from both combined. Each one, since the chumrah of one is not like the other, so therefore you can learn from both combined. And you can't tell me because it needs Tan, Dam, and Veimurim, because Bikurim doesn't. You can't tell me because it needs Hanacha, because Bechori doesn't. And from the combination of the two, you'd be able to learn, even without the Hakesh, that the Ma'aseh Sheni cannot be brought up nowadays. So that's the Gemara's Kasha. But he had the din of a Teisi B'Me'atzad. The Gemara should have learned it out with a B'Me'atzad, meaning that the Sada Shav of both Bechor and Bikurim is that it can't be brought up nowadays. It needs to be brought up to Yerushalayim, but it can't be. So the same thing should apply to Ma'aser Sheni. So the Gemara answers, no, Mishum De'ekel Mifra, the Bryce didn't even try to do that because there's a slug up. You could have added Ma'alat Tzad HaShavashim Shekein Yesh Ben Sad Mizbeach. There would have been a kasha that Ma'alat Tzad HaShavash Behen Shekein Yesh Ben Sad Mizbeach, meaning both Bikurim and Bechor have some sort of shaykhs in Mizbeach. Ma'aser Sheni doesn't, and therefore just because we find that Bechor and just that we find that Bechor and Bikurim they cannot be done nowadays, right? You can't bring them up and eat them in Yerushalayim nowadays. So there's no raya to the case of Ma'aser Sheni because there's Sad Mizbeach by both. I just want to point out that many Rishonim learn, by the way, that what do you mean? Obviously, you can't do. Besides the Pirkei, it's obvious. Bechor you can't do nowadays because it's Takanah Mizbeach, and Bikurim you can't do nowadays because there's no. So they explain that it's talking even about a situation where the Beis Hamikdash would have been destroyed between the Akravas Emurin and the right and the time to eat it. And the question is, could you eat it then? And the assumption is that not. The assumption is that not. And for whatever reason, we'll soon see. And everyone applied the same thing to Ma'aser Sheni. And we're saying, by the end of the day, Bechor is a certain chumrah of ton and Bikurim has a tzad mizbeach. Okay, so let's pause over here for a moment. Let's see Rashi. Rashi starts off with the Rashi that we're doing is Shloisha Devarim, the top line of the Amish. Shloisha Devarim Zuach, and this is just one of them. All in the Sifri. In other words, we say Shloisha Devarim, we don't end up saying Shloisha Devarim, we end up just saying one din of Ma'aser Sheni, that Ma'aser Sheni nowadays you cannot bring it up to Yerushalayim and eat it. The Havamina, not just the Havamina necessarily, this Tana holds that Kedushas Haaretz loy bat. The B'tzarek Hafresh Ma'aser, you for sure have to be Mafresh Ma'aser. There's a din of Kedushas Haaretz, and you have to be Mafresh Ma'aser Sheni, Ma'aser, whatever it is. Or Ka'amar, the Gemara is thinking that Yachal Yaleni V'Yachleni B'Shalayim, but that you can even deal with the Ma'aser Sheni by taking up to Yerushalayim. The Ma'aser you can't, and you have to be paid there. But the Gemara's Bryce is trying to work with that. Talmud loy ma'bechulu, that we learn out from the Hakash that Ma'aser Sheni is compared to Bechol. The Fichal Torn Bayis, therefore you need a Bayis, a Beis Hamikdash. And then Rashi obviously asks the obvious question: what's going on over there? How do we know in the first place that by Bechor you can't do nowadays? That you and therefore we have a Hakash. You can apply what it says by Bechor to Ma'aser Sheni. By Bechor you can't do it nowadays. In other words, that you can't eat it in Yerushalayim in a situation, I guess, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed between the Akravas Emurin and the time to eat it. The Gemara says mitzvah milaka. So the Gemara wanted to bring a raya from the Bryce that Rav Sheshes wanted. Sorry, so the Gemara wanted to bring a raya that Rav Sheshes must go like this. Tanif, and the fact that the Bryce didn't say Mali Bikurim Shekain Tunim Kriya Vanach, he said Anach is a raya that is not Ma'akav. So Rav Ashi said that's not a raya. Mitzvah milaka. But given the mitzvah, and if Rav Kriya the mitzvah should have said that has a chumrah that there's a mitzvah to do kriya, which doesn't apply to Ma'aser Sheni. Loi psikile. So Rav Ashi said that the reason why it doesn't say kriya is for a different reason, because loi psikile. Or me will be Yisroel, but were it to be by Yisroel, not a ger, right? Not a situation where there's no kriya, there is a chiyuv kriya, then it could be that the kriya is leikuva, and the fact that the Bryce doesn't say is no raya one way or another. Then you had the din of an esim metzad after we finished dealing with the actual Bryce and the raya from the Bryce, and the fact there's no raya from the Bryce. The Gemara asked just a second. The Bryce is l'chor chasa. Why we didn't want to learn from a binyan now because Bechor has a certain form and Bikurim has another form. Why not learn from the combination of Bechor and Bikurim, since the chumras of each one are different one from the other, which is what's called the b'mei tzad. Lama li akesha. Rashi explains the kasha nicely. Yeah, lama li akesha. Why do we need the hakash? Name of Bechor yochiach. Say after saying that Bikurim doesn't work, say Bechor proves v'chozer adin. And learn from both. The the common denominator of Bechor and Ma'aser Sheni and Bikurim, is Shabahen Shedhun Abbas Mak, and they both need to be brought up to Yerushalayim. But ain't you and apply it to Ma'aser Sheni. So the Gemara said, no, you can't learn it from a Tzad, from a Vinyan Av, because they both have a Tzad Mizbech. They both have the same chumrah that they need to have something to do with the Mizbech. Zeh Matan Dam. In the case of Bechor, it's the Matan Damim, and in the case of Bikurim, Zeh Lahanaf. You have to be clear. Okay. So now we get into a slightly more complicated Gemara. It's a hamshach to what we're saying earlier. Yeah, back in the Gemara, Makkos. The Gemara is asking this question, which Rashi already preempted and said that why are we so sure that Bechor, for example, is not applicable nowadays, and therefore we were ready to learn from a binyan av, and then finally we did learn from a hakash that Ma'aser Sheni is compared to Bechor, and just like Bechor is not shaykh nowadays, so Ma'aser Sheni is also not. Well, Makkos, what did we think? And he touches his eyes and he already goes into second guessing what the Tana thought. Well, Makkos, there's a general machlokas whether the kedusha of the mizbeach And Kedusha Rishona doesn't necessarily mean Kedusha Rishona over here. Mamis means Kedusha Shnia, meaning the second Beis Hamikdash was Niskadish. When there was a Churban Abayis, was the Kedusha stopped? Or does the Makom Abayis still have a Kedusha nowadays? He says that it's Iksav a Kedusha Rishona, Kedusha Shaita, a Kedusha Lasin Lavoi, Afilu B'choinami. If we thought the Kedusha Rishona, Kedusha Shaita, a Kedusha Lasin Lavoi, so then Afilu B'choinami. Even Bechor should also be offered up. In other words, why are you so sure that Bechor is not offered up? Adrabah, Bechor should be offered up. In other words, even if there's right, you can mamish offer it up, right? As Rashi says, Yikra v'yoichel. Yeah, the man the Amr who says, I know this sounds very foreign to us. We have in our heads that there's no Beis Hamikdash nowadays, we can't offer up karbanis. It's not so right. There's other reasons why we can't offer up karbanis even. But the Maisa in the Gemara. There's the svara of kitcher shayna, kitcher l'shayda, kitcher l'asalav is that even though there's no Beis Hamikdash, you could offer up karbanis even if there's no Beis Hamikdash. And if that's the case, you could offer up the bechor. And what's happens? Why are you telling me that bechor you can't offer up and then learning to ma'aser sheni? If kedusha shayna, kitcher l'shayda, kitcher l'asalav, if you do bechor nami, even bechor also you should for sure be able to offer up. Why are you taking on that not? And you're going to tell me that no, the Tan of the Brisa understands that the Kedusha, which there was originally in the time of the Binyan Habayis, doesn't apply anymore. It's not Nimshat to nowadays after the Korban Habayis. If that's the case, you're going to tell me when the Kedusha first came and the Beis Hamikdash, it only worked for then, but it doesn't work for now. You should have had a Shaila by Bechor. Why are you so sure? You should have had a shaila about Bechor, and the way Rashi explains it, and other Rishonim explain it, is that taka you can't bring it up nowadays and offer it up, but you should still have had a shaila that if it was offered up, is mana bias, and then the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, but you should have a shaila in such a situation, can you still eat it or not? Can you still eat it or not? And maybe you can eat it, maybe you can't eat it. You could have the same shaila. Why are you so sure? Why are you so sure that ma'aser sheni? Right, because ma'aser sheni, what you're being done, you're not being done on whether it can be offered up. There's not, right? You're being done when you get to ma'aser sheni is whether you can eat it in Yerushalayim. You want to learn from Bechor. What are you learning from Bechor? Whether Bechor can be eaten in Yerushalayim nowadays or not. Now, true, you've got a technical problem in many cities, right? If kedusha rishon, kitchen the shayt, loy kitchen last love, that you can't offer up the Bechor, but you have a hechetimsa where it was offered up before the korban habayis, and now you want to know whether you can eat it. Yeah, yud of whatever that year, the next day, or after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and you can have the same shayla, can it be eaten or not? And you don't know. And if you don't know, then you can't learn from Ma'aser Sheni that not. It seems that the Gemara took right to go and be pshitas that you can't, even by Bechor. Yeah. So let's pause for a moment over here and let's learn Rashi just because. Yeah. So Makkos is a high tana de pshitale Bechor tfei ma'aser. Right. So Rashi towards the top of the page, a few lines down from where I go to backstop. So Makkos a high tana de pshitale Bechor tfei ma'aser. What's bothering the Gemara is that this tana, which took for granted, was obvious to him that Bechor cannot be eaten in Yerushalayim nowadays. The Klein cannot eat it. Why is that more partial to you than the fact that Ma'aser Sheni can or cannot be eaten? You ask a shayla, what's the din of Ma'aser Sheni? Tell me, well, we learn Ma'aser Sheni from Bechor. Why so sure that Bechor can't be eaten in Yerushalayim? So we say like this: it's just like the Tana understood. And the Maskana Taka was sure that Kedushas Aretz applies, and after there's a Chi of Ma'aser Sheni, and the whole question was the whole kasha was that now that there's no wall, is that place in Yerushalayim where the walls were, right? The walls were. Is it considered Lifnei Hashem Lekachai? And we learn Ma'aser from Bechor. If Kedush Rishon Kitchen Shaita v'Kitchen Lasi Lavai, then even Bechor also should be offered up. The man that is the kitchen last love is really making Mapshem Baitin. I mean, Megillah class. Says the Farish Megillah that the man which says that the Kedusha Rishon applies nowadays as well. Taka, you could bring it up as a carbon, and if that's the case, you could bring it up and you could eat it, and else fine. So why are you so sure that Bechor not? Bechor is Yago. The Ma'aser Sheni should also be Yago. The Iksav, are you going to tell me loy kitcha? Now, if you Bechor nami teboy, you should at least have the question about Bechor. What's Pshat? Iksav Kedusha Zabai spot. If you're going to tell me. The Taka, this Tana holds that there's no Kedushas Habayis anymore. You can't offer up the Bechor. Umi boy, Leben Ma'aser, and the Shaila by Ma'aser is as follows. Hoil ve'ein is sark Habayis. Since the Ma'aser Sheni doesn't need a Beis Hamikdash, the din of Ma'aser Sheni isn't to bring it into the Beis Hamikdash, it's just to bring it to Yerushalayim. Imis Akab Yerushalayim, Lifnei Hashem K'rina Beila. Your whole Shaila is just whether the act of eating Yerushalayim, Lifnei Hashem, is it considered Lifnei Hashem or not? And that's your question. You can have the same Shaila by Bechor. Afilu Bechor nami ki hai gamnati boile, and here's the key. For example, the Bechor, which is the blood was sprinkled before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and then subsequently Bechor of Abayis, Adayin B'Sori Kai Ma'al Sheichlu, you can have the same kasha. Can it be eaten or not? Is Yerushalayim considered Lifnei Hashem after the Korban Abayis or not. So why are we so sure by Bechor that, right, the same Shaila which applies to Ma'aseh Sheni applies to Bechor as well? That is the Gemara's kasha. So Rabbeinu answers like this back in the Gemara. Amar Rabbeinu. 8 lines to the bottom of the page. Amar Rabbeinu lo'olam tzava kitchel l'shaita v'loy kitchel asilav. That the kedusha of the Beis Hamikdash was taka kitchel l'shaita v'loy kitchel asilavoi. It's kitchel l'shaita v'kitchel asilav. You can't offer it the bechor. And the Gemara continues by saying something which is it's an interesting lashon. Rashi assumes that the Gemara already understood this even in Havamina, but that's sometimes the derech of the Gemara to do. Here we're talking about a situation which Rashi already understood in the Gemara's question. Yeah, that we're talking about the dion is we're talking about a bechor. You dealt with the problem of offering it up because it was nizrek dam kaidim korban abayis. Bechor abayis v'adaim b'sarkam. Now you've got a question whether the basa can be eaten. We're really back to the original question. Why are we so sure by bechor that it cannot be eaten in Yerushalayim after the korban abayis? Ma'aseh Sheni, we have the question. So he answers on makshinon b'sari l'damin. By bechor we have a hakesh of basa to the dam. It says in the pasuk, I guess, basa and dam one next to the other. See, yeah. Yeah, it's a pasuk we'll see in Rashi. Ma dome b'mizbeach, apasari b'mizbeach. Yeah, just like the dam can only sprinkle the dam if there's a mizbeach. That's obvious. Apasari. So also the achilas habasa is toloi b'mizbeach. There has to be a mizbeach. And now that we know that if there's no mizbeach, the basa can't be eaten. And then umakish ma'aseh lebechor. And then you learn whatever we learn by bechor, which is that bechor because there's a hakish of dam to basa, and the basa can't be offered when there's no bayis sheni. Sorry, the dam can't be offered sprinkled in, right? So the basa also can't be eaten even in Yerushalayim after the korban abayis. So therefore we learn that the same thing applies to ma'aseh sheni, that it can't be eaten in Yerushalayim after the korban abayis. It's not considered. Umakish ma'aseh lebechor. Period. So now the Gemara says kasha. So here you need to know a little bit of Klein. There's a Klein in Kodshim only, for some reason. I'm not sure how you get to the Maskana. You have to miss down and look in the Gemara in Zavachim. That something which is learned out in a Hakesh. In other words, when can you learn a Hakesh from one thing to another? Only when the Torah explicitly says that this is the din by such a thing. But if the only way that you have A, B, and C, right? So if the Torah tells you by A there's such and such a din, you can learn from A to B. But if B, it doesn't say, and B, you only know the din applies to B because it's learned from A. You can't then go and learn C from B with a hakesh. In other words, you have to learn direct by kodshim. That's the Klein. So over here you have the same thing. Where does it say clearly? In other words, where is it explicit that bechor cannot be is tali in the mizbeach when you get to the basar of the bechor, the dam? Sorry, the dam. It can't be sprinkled, right? And that's clear. The fact that the basar can't be eaten when there's no mizbeach is only because the basar is compared to the dam. So then you can't have a situation where ma'aseh sheni is being learned from the basa. That's the kasha. The Gemara's answer is that ma'aseh dagon chulin. That this whole klal of a dov alon b'hakesh chayzim and actually you can't learn one thing out of the hakesh from something which was already learned out of hakesh. Only applies to kodshim. Ma'aseh dagon, ma'aseh sheni is considered chulin, and by chulin you don't have that klal. For some reason, by chulin there's look up in Zvachim, yeah. That by chulin we do say that you can learn B from A and then C from B. B can be learned from A with a hakesh and C, and so over here it's not a problem. The dam, the basar, the bechor is learned from dam of the bechor, and since the ma'aseh sheni is chulin, so chulin can be learned from the basar of the bechor with a hakesh. So the Gemara straight away says, just a second, you're assuming too much because that there's a machloikas with regards to what's considered chulin or kodshim, whether you go basa the melamed or basa the lamed. Do you go basa the thing which is being learned out of the thing that you're learning to, or the thing that you're learning from? So I'll just say outside first. If you say that you're going basa the thing that you're learning to, so everything's fine. You're learning to a case of ma'aseh sheni. Ma'aseh sheni is chulin, so you can learn from a hakesh to ma'aseh sheni from something else which was a hakesh, not a problem, because it all depends on what you're learning to. And since what you're learning to is chulin, so the klal of ein dova alamed b'hakesh chayzim and b'hakesh doesn't apply. But if you say that it all depends on the melamed, it all depends on what you're learning from. So in this case, who cares that ma'aseh sheni is chulin? You're learning it from the basar of bechor, and the basar of bechor is kodshim, which you can't do two hakeshes. And since that's learned from a hakesh, you can't teach to another hakesh. So that's the Gemara's kasha. Ha nichal leman dama inside the top of your test of the base. Ha nichal leman dama basar lami doesn't mean that's all fine and good according to the man dama who says that what determines whether something is kodshim or not with regards to this cloud of one thing being learned out of a hakash can't teach something else with a hakash is only good if you say that what determines whether it's kachim or not is basa lamed. You go based on what you're learning to, which in this case is ma'is shein, which is chol and is good and fine. But according to the mandam, who says that the way we determine whether something is kachim and get to this cloud is with regard it all depends on the melamed and what's teaching, and over here the melamed is the basar of the bechor. What can you say? Yeah, you've got a kasha. So the Gemara answers damu basa chadam nulsei. So basically, pshat is, if I remember correctly, damu basa chadam nulsei means that it's not really a hakash. It's one unit. It's one carbon. So the fact that it's not pshat that we're learning basar from dam with a hakash, and then it's one thing. But damu basa chadam nulsei, the pasuk talks about both of them together. It's all one thing. Let's see Rashi inside. I think Amr Rabbeinu, yeah, the fourth to last Rashi on the page. Amr Rabbeinu lo'olam ksav lo'ikad kitchav hachad the kapasha leila ma'asim b'chor. And over here, where we're learning ma'isa from a hakash from b'chor, the b'chor she'ein tzarich l'bayis don't need the ma'isa skin tak. We're talking about b'chor which doesn't need the base hamikdash, just like ma'isa. Right? Otherwise, there's nothing to compare. Right. In other words, the hard pshitale the loimis was pshat that it doesn't need the bias because the bias was destroyed after you offered it up. The hard pshitale the loimis achal mishum the iskriv started on the reason why the brisa took on pashtas that it was obvious to the brisa that you can't eat the bechor, you cannot eat the bechor in Yerushalayim, can't be eaten at all after the korban abayis. Mishum the iskriv started on. Pasuk is compared to the dam. The chesiv says in the pasuk as damam tizikam bechor b'sarim yelachem. Right. So it says all in one. Same sentence, one connected one to the other. But when there's Vesdam Tizrich, so then then you can eat it. Once the base something was destroyed, when the dam would not be right to the mizbeah, so therefore the basar is also cannot be eaten. The basar which is learned out of a hakash from the dam, can it then go teach ala ma'isa the hakash? So the case of Maisa with the Hakash, the Gemara teaches us in Zvachim, in Daf Mem Tes Amud Beis, She'ein l'meidim b'kadshim, lamed min alamed. You can't learn one thing which is being taught from something else, which was learned out of something else. Ein l'meidim b'kadshim lamed, something you can't learn to one thing. Min alamed from something else which isn't the farish in the past, it's learned from something else. The Gemara answers that that's a Klein Kodshim, as it says in the Gemara over there in Ezim. But Ma'isa Dag Chulinu. B'chulin the maiden lam min alam. B'chulin, for whatever reason, we have to learn lam min alam, and you can learn B from A with a hakash and then C from B. So the Gemara says, okay, that's fine. That goes very fine according to Mandam, who says Basalam and Dazlin, and Plukti Beis Mekayim says Rashi. But according to Mandam, Basalam and Dazlin Maikin, the Gemara says Dam Ubasar. Chada Dam Ubasa is considered one thing. It's not considered a hakash one thing from the other. It's all one animal. It's one. That's it. So we'll stop over here, and soon we'll do the review.